1 Timothy chapter 1, we're going to be looking at the last few verses today. 1 Timothy chapter 1, last few verses. It's going to take a while to get there because I really want to try to set the stage. I want us to really get the full impact of what's going on in 1 Timothy chapter 1. So start in your mind's eye with me. Back in the Old Testament, one of the more significant events took place in the Old Testament when a man named Moses was by Mount Horeb and saw a bush that catches his attention. From a distance, he sees a bush that's on fire, but it's not really on fire. You know, we usually refer to it as the burning bush. Probably should call it the unburnt burning bush or whatever, because the whole idea here is it's not burning. I mean, it is kind of, but the bush isn't burning up. I know I'm taking way too long to say this, but I'm doing that on purpose because I really want you to think about this with me for just a minute. I mean, God could have got Moses' attention anyway, right? He could have said, Moses, over here, I want to talk to you. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways. Why something like this? Think about it for just a minute. The only details the Bible gives us is the bush, there were the flames, it was on fire, but the bush wasn't burning up, right? Well, what does that communicate? Well, on the most basic level, it communicates that's impossible. That doesn't happen. Either it's burning or it's not burning. Make up your mind. Don't tell me something's burning and it's not burning. Well, that's the point. What do I mean by that? Well, look forward in Jesus' ministry. What was he proving when he walked on water? What was he proving when he took one lunch and was able to feed thousands of people, reduplicating it? What was he proving when he took somebody who'd never seen, born blind, and gave him sight? What was he proving when he stood in the graveyard and called out the name of his friend Lazarus, who'd been in there 4 days, and he comes back to life? These are things that just do not happen. And the point I'm trying to make is, it's not just wow, oh, it's not just neat, oh, it's not just, wow, that took a lot of strength, wow, that took a lot of insight. No, it took something impossible. These things do not happen. And that's one of the things Jesus is communicating. He's not from this realm. He's beyond it. And God, the God, by the way, that the Bible tells us, this is in Psalm 33, who spoke the world into existence. Can you just stop and chew on that for just a minute? How did things get here? How were they created? He spoke, and they appeared. That does not happen in the world that we see, and that's the point. He is beyond the world that we see, and very effectively making that point again before he even starts this discussion with Moses. He's proving I'm God in the fullest, richest sense of that idea. Beyond everything, the one true God. So Moses sees this bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. He draws close. He hears the voice of God. God speaks to him from the bush, and first thing he tells him to do is take the sandals off his feet. Remember this? Take sandals off your feet because you're walking on holy ground. That's what the Bible tells us. What's the significance there in many cultures, and especially in ancient time? The way you could tell the difference between somebody who was a slave and a free person is if they wore something on their feet. Slaves typically weren't allowed to wear sandals. They weren't allowed to wear feet covering. So what's the point? There's probably a lot more than just this, but it was so associated with slavery in the ancient world, especially in different cultures, that one of the things I think God's communicating is this is not just something you've never seen before. To me, you're here to serve. I'm God. You're not. And what does he tell Moses? Again, if you have time to maybe this afternoon go back and look at chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Exodus, he tells them, listen, I've heard the cries of my people. They've been in slavery a long time, and I'm going to take care of that. And Moses, I choose you. In so many words, he says, I choose you. And in so many words, Moses says, anybody else but me. Right? He has a lot of questions. He has some objections, and God answers all those things. He answers all the questions, tells him what's going to be involved, tells him what to expect. And after this going back and forth with God, he ends up by saying, in essence, I know I'm paraphrasing here, but Moses says, that's great, that's wonderful, please send somebody else to do this. And it's this point that the Bible tells us that God became angry with Moses. You know, there's a lot of people you don't want to make bad, right? A lot of people you don't want to get on their bad side. Getting on God's bad side. God said, your brother can go with you. You can get some help. But you know what? I don't care if you want to go or not. You're going. You're my person. Wow. God accomplished a lot of things through the ministry of Moses, whether he wanted to go or not. I don't know about you, when I read a story like that, I think, man, glad I'm not Moses. Oh, but you are. It may not be a burning bush. The circumstance may be a little bit different, but the message is the exact same. Just like God chose Moses, you're a follower of Christ. He chose you for a mission, just like Moses had a mission. We rehearse this from time to time, and I think it's a very appropriate because at the conclusion of Jesus' ministry, you find this in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 and following. Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given unto me. All authority. By the way, he said this at the conclusion of his ministry. Conclusion of his ministry means he just rose from the dead. It wasn't a burning bush, it was a resurrection. People don't rise from the dead. After being on the ground for 3 days, they don't come back to life of their own accord, period. He did. He's above and beyond all that we know in this world. And having proven himself, he is the one who is the authority. He knows all about this life and the life to come in heaven and on earth. Therefore, he says, because I've got it all figured out, you go. He's talking to his disciples. You go make disciples. You know, you look at this story and sometimes you're tempted to scratch your head and say, yeah, well, maybe he's just talking to the 12. Maybe he's just talking to the 11 at this point, but maybe he's just talking to the original ones. Maybe it's not to us. You keep on reading. It's just a couple of verses, and the way he concludes this is by saying, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. You know that little translation? That's the way most Bibles translate it. That word there that's translated even to the end of the age. You know, you could translate that word forever. You could translate it eternity. You know what? From now on, my followers, here you go. You want to know what your mission in life is? You want to know what it's all about? You want to know what you're here for? To make disciples. And he explains it. He says, by baptizing people and teaching them. That's why baptism and teaching is so important. But let's focus on this word, disciple. We focus on it from time to time. The reason we do that is because it's not a word you use in everyday life, not most people. We know what disciples are. They're like students. They're like followers. But my favorite one is apprentice. Because the idea of a disciple is somebody who draws close to the one they're learning from, draws close to the one that they're following, draws close to the point where the closer I get, the more I become like the person that I am a disciple of. That's the idea. But look at what he says here. Here's your mission in life. It's not, let me say it this way. God's not looking at you. The church isn't looking at you and saying, we want to change you. No. What the church is saying, and I hope accurately representing what God is saying, is this. No, we don't want to change you. We want to make you into somebody who's going to be changing people. Do you get the nuance difference there? We're not to be disciples. He says that's not the purpose of life. Purpose of life is we're here to make disciples. We're here as God's people to try to encourage and equip one another to help us better be people who change people. That's one of the main reasons we're looking at passages like this. One of the main reasons we go through everything that God says. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, these last few verses, this is another presentation of the exact same mission, the exact same marching orders. We are here to be the people who change people in this world and bring them closer to Jesus. Look at the way it was for Timothy. You ready for this? 1 Timothy chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. Timothy, my son. My son. It wasn't physically his son, but he's talking about our relationship within the church. We're like a family. We're here to support and encourage one another. And just like my own son, I want you to make sure you keep on focus. I want you to make sure you live life the way it's supposed to be lived, right? He says, Timothy, my son, I am giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies. By the way, when he says, I'm giving you this command, military expression there. Straight out of the Greek fighting passages that you find. This is like a commanding officer talking to some of the soldiers. And he's saying, this is the way you do it. It's exactly, he turns from family to military here, and he says, my son, I'm giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them, you remember what you're here for? By recalling them, you may fight the battle well. Fight the good fight. Fight the battle well. That's what we talked about last week, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. Our goal here is to take every thought captive. We don't just look at people and the situations they're in. How did everybody get there? It starts from within. That's the battleground. That's how we change people. But look what he says. Verse 19, how do you do this? Holding on to faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and have suffered shipwreck in regard to their faith. Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme. I want to work in reverse order here. What does the word blaspheme mean? Blaspheme is it's a compound word in the Greek language. It means to speak in a hurtful way. It means to slander. It means to slander. I want you to see the big picture here, what's going on. He brings up these two guys that they're not helping at all. In fact, everything that comes out of their mouth, they actually make matters worse. Well, how do you make matters worse? You're getting people further away from Jesus than closer to him. Do you see what he's doing here? He's saying, listen, Timothy, keep on track, keep on focus. Remember what you're here for. The people who aren't doing that, in fact, the very people who are hurting this, Paul says, kicked them out of church. I've got to pause for just a second. There's only two places in the New Testament where it talks about kicking somebody out of church. This passage right here, and then 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And in both places, it's not we're kicking you to the curb. We don't care about you anymore. We're just going to keep on with our mission. You know, you're not with the program. You know, no more time for you. No. In both places, 1 Corinthians 5, a little more clear than here. But did you catch this? He says, I'm turning over to Satan that they might what? Learn. He's doing this because he actually cares about these very people who aren't doing the job. He wants them to figure out, what are you here for? And you're not doing it, so maybe you just need to take some time on the sidelines to reevaluate your life and remember, hey, you know what? It's like a race, or let's, since he talks about shipwreck, let's picture a boat race. You're not crossing the finish line, you're on the rocks. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to the place we need to go. You need to stop and think about get back in the race so that we can be people who change people. We can fight the battle to take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ, bringing people closer to him. So how does he say, Timothy? How are you going to do this? Here it is. Right there in that 19th verse, he said, with faith and a good conscience. That's the phrase I want to focus on the remainder of our time this morning. How do we effectively get back on track? How do we effectively stay on mission that God's chosen us to do? Well, faith and good conscience. When we talk about faith in the Bible, it's just a word that means a trusting kind of belief. It's not just an assent, right? It's not just, I get it, I agree with it. No, it's more than that. I agree with it, and I am committed to it because I know, which, by the way, it's fascinating to me. There's two different words in the New Testament for the word knowledge, and the one most used for Christians is the word of knowledge. That means you've grown by experience to understand this. That's what we're talking about with our faith. It's something that we trust, that we believe, but at the end of the day, this word is also used sometimes just to talk about that which we believe. Listen, to have faith, you have to have faith in something. There is a truth. I'm going to come back and talk about that in a minute, but look what he says. It's the faith with a good conscience. What's this good conscience thing? You know, some people have a clean conscience when they shouldn't have a clean conscience. You know that, right? What is this good conscience thing that we're talking about here? In the Old Testament, again, I love the way the Old Testament presents the idea of really examining your conscience, because here's usually the way it presents it, especially in the Psalms and poetic literature. It'll talk about when you lie down at night. What's up with that? Why is it always talking about taking a nap, going to sleep, stuff like that? Because in the ancient's mind, you are most apt to be most honest with yourself when nobody else is around, at a time of the day when you're most likely to be rehearsing the events of the day, right before you fall asleep. And so when you sit down and you think about your life, do you think about your mission? Last year, some of you will probably remember, I was reading a book by a missionary, and this missionary was talking about an opportunity he had to share the gospel with a young woman. This young woman as I recall, pretty much point blank said, I don't believe this stuff, but give it your best shot. Tell me, what is it all about? And so he thought, okay, open invitation. I'm going to tell you. And then in like 15 minutes, something like that, 15, 20 minutes, kind of sat down, opened up his Bible, talked about big picture God, Jesus getting us right with God, how heaven and hell are the consequences, eternity. He talked about all that stuff. As soon as he finished, she looked him right in the eye. You could tell he's telling the story, but you could tell, as he said, that she was really listening. And as soon as he finished, the first thing she asked was, do you really believe all that stuff you just told me? Do you really believe that? And he kind of took offense to that. What do you mean? Of course I believe this stuff. Do you need to get in an argument about the evidences and apologetics and all this stuff? He's ready to roll. He said, what do you mean? Do I believe this? He says, of course I do. And then she said, man, if that's true, if I believed it, I don't think I could sleep at night. I don't think I'd ever let go of my friend's legs and the tears coming down my cheeks because I couldn't stand the thought of them going to an eternity like you describe. If that's real, I'm not so sure I could live. And yet you tell me this message like you're reading the newspaper. You look like somebody who is checking something off your list, and when you're done talking to me, you're going to go about your day and never think about me again. He told this story and wrote it down because it was like a knife in his chest. It's like, you know what? Maybe my conscience was not making me feel guilty when I should have, because I should have been thinking about my mission. This is the biggest thing in life, and I get to be part of it. It's got to grab our hearts, but I want to go back to this truth. Yeah, we need to care about people, but you got to care about them with something. My dad gave me an article just a few months ago, quite interesting article. It's found in a publication put out by the Christian Restoration Association. And in this article, I don't have time to get into all the details, but I want to tell you the illustration. It was an analogy, and I'm all about great analogies and stuff. I just love them. And I'm reading this article. In fact, he starts off with this analogy, and he went in such detail with this thing. I'm like, what in the world? Where are we going? I wanted to flip ahead and read later on, but I made myself just stay with the analogy because it was all about cherry pies, and I really like cherry pies. So let me tell you the analogy. Here you go. There are three, according to this. I think it was Lee Mason, by the way, but don't quote me on that. There are three kinds of cherry pies. There are cherry pies with stones in them. Do you know what he means by that? Cherries have pits, I like that he calls it stones, because if you've ever bitten into one of those things, it feels like a stone, right? You know what I'm talking about? Is there anybody here who doesn't just absolutely love cherry pies? Don't want to see it. Okay. Anyway, there are three kinds of cherry pies. First kind of cherry pie has stones in it. It's full of stones because people who make the cherry pie decided, you know what, it's just too much time and effort to take all those pits out of the cherries. I'm just going to tell people, hey, it's got pits. Watch out, right? But here's cherry pie. There's a second kind of cherry pie where somebody takes the time to pull the pits out, right? But they never get all the pits out. So we're going to call it a 99% pit-free cherry pie. Then there's a third kind of cherry pie where you get this real meticulous person who went through and pulled out all the pits and then went back again and double-checked for all the pits, and then the third time to make sure that it's absolutely pit-free, right? So you've got a cherry pie, no stones. Cherry pie, just a couple stones. Cherry pie full of stones, right? Okay, he says, you know what kind of cherry pie I want? I would rather have the one full of pits. Why? Because when I eat a pie like that, I don't bite down hard. I'm cautious with every bite. I enjoy the cherry pie, and I'm spitting out those stones, right? The problem with the kind of cherry pie that most people choose is you might eat several bites, you might have a whole piece or two, and everything's great. But then out of the blue, you're chomping down, and boom! Oh, man, you feel like you broke the tooth. Have you ever had that happen? It's just like, oh! Hurts so bad. Why did it hurt? Because you weren't prepared. You weren't prepared. Here you go. When you listen to the news or you go to work or you're at school and you're in a place anywhere out in the world, most of us as Christians realize the world's full of stones. We have our guard up. We don't bite down quickly. Why? Because we know the prince of the power of the air has an influence over the world in which we live. But when we come to church, our guard's down, right? With the fellowship of believers, we just expect everything they say and everything they do, man, it's going to be right. And every once in a while, it's not right. And you know what? People really, really get hurt. Why? Because we've been lured into this idea that as long as we're better than the world, it's okay. No, it's not. No, it's not. Not till every pit's gone. It has to be a constant endeavor to look at everything God says. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing changed. Because that's what they need. They need it, and it's the truth. And with faith and a good conscience that keeps driving you to the people who need to hear about that faith, we'll keep on task. Moses kept on task. He fulfilled the mission God gave him, but it wasn't easy. Oh, it wasn't easy. Man, there's so many things he had to face, but one of the things I'm guessing is probably most difficult for Moses is when his own family turned against him. Sister Miriam, brother Aaron, they even turned on him. You find the story in Numbers chapter 12. And I love the way God calls them out. And again, paraphrasing, but in so many words, God says to Moses' sister, brother, weren't you afraid to talk against my servant, Moses? He, in so many words, says, when you picked on him, you picked on me because Moses is my person. Are you God's person? No. You are God's person, and you've been given a mission.